Imagine a deity so terrifying, her rage nearly wiped out humanity. Who was this ancient avenger, and what provoked her fury? Prepare to uncover the secrets of Sekhmet, the lioness goddess whose power made even the gods tremble. Long before the desert sands swallowed kingdoms whole, before the Nile carried prayers on its tide, and before the pharaohs carved their names into eternity, there was a time when the gods walked openly among mortals. They watched, listened, and occasionally intervened, sometimes with mercy, sometimes with wrath. Among these divine beings, one stood above the rest, not because of love or wisdom, but because of terror. Her name was spoken only in whispers: Sekhmet, the Eye of Ra, the flame of the sun, the lioness goddess whose breath birthed the desert winds, and whose rage once nearly wiped humanity from the earth. In the holy city of Heliopolis, a scribe named Neferhotep had long been the keeper of forbidden scrolls buried deep within the temple of the sun. The high priests forbade their reading, claiming the ink itself pulsed with ancient fury. But Neferhotep, driven by curiosity and the strange visions that plagued his sleep, defied the law. One scroll, wrapped in lionskin parchment and sealed with gold wax, called to him as if it knew his name. Its glyphs shimmered with heat as he opened it, and a low growl echoed across the chamber, though no beast stood near. The title chilled his bones: The Day Blood Fed the Nile. The story that unfolded was not a tale for children or even the wise. It spoke of a time when mankind had grown arrogant, daring to mock the gods. Ra, the great sun god, watched with sorrow as men spat on the offerings, desecrated shrines, and built monuments to themselves rather than the divine. He convened the gods in a council, his form weary, his spirit fading under the weight of mortal betrayal. It was then that he summoned his daughter, Sekhmet, his eye, his fury. She descended not as a spirit or a whisper, but as a roaring flame wrapped in the form of a lioness. Her mane burned like the midday sun, and her eyes held the reflection of 1,000 burning cities. With her coming, balance ended. The scroll described the sky splitting open and crimson winds sweeping the land. Sekhmet tore through cities like a wildfire. Fields turned to ash, temples collapsed, and rivers overflowed with blood. Men, women, children, none were spared. The punishment had no mercy because the offense had been grave. The gods trembled. Even Set, the lord of chaos, dared not face her. Neferhotep paused his reading. The chamber was cold now. The torch flickered violently, then went out. A low growl rose behind him. He turned, but nothing was there, only the shadows dancing along the sandstone walls. But something had changed. A smell of dust and sun-scorched fur lingered. The scroll's final lines told of how the gods tricked Sekhmet into stopping. They brewed thousands of jars of beer dyed with pomegranate juice to resemble blood and poured it across the battlefield. Thinking it was more blood, Sekhmet drank and drank until she was intoxicated. Only then did her rage fade. Only then did the slaughter end. But the scroll did not stop there. It warned that Sekhmet's fury was not extinguished, only sleeping. Her wrath was bound to a relic, an amulet shaped like a lion's head, hidden in the desert sands far beyond the reach of man. Should it ever be unearthed, the goddess would rise again, and this time, no trickery would quench her thirst. The seal of Ra himself held her in slumber, and without it, she would become the sun's shadow, burning, relentless, eternal. Neferhotep slammed the scroll shut. His hands trembled, and sweat pooled at his brow. Yet even as he tried to return the scroll, he found he could not. It clung to him, its energy seeping into his skin. That night, he dreamed again, only this time it was no dream. A desert, endless and burning, a temple buried in sand, and in the center, a statue of Sekhmet, weeping blood from stone eyes. He awoke screaming, claw marks bleeding into his back, though his chamber door had never opened. Word of Neferhotep's madness spread quickly. The high priests declared him cursed, and the scroll was taken from him, sealed once more within the crypts. But the visions did not stop. More troubling still, across Egypt, omens began to rise. The Nile refused to flood. Crops withered prematurely. Lions, long vanished from the northern plains, were spotted near villages. A red sun rose 3 mornings in a row, and with it came heat so intense that even bricks cracked in their walls. In the southern city of Thebes, a child was born, covered in strange birthmarks, the shape of a lion's paw across her back. She did not cry, only stared with golden eyes that made elders fall silent. The priestesses whispered that she was a reincarnation, a vessel, or perhaps a warning. No one dared speak the name, but they all remembered the old scrolls, the old stories, and the rage that once walked the earth. Neferhotep, now exiled, wandered the desert in search of answers. He believed the relic had been disturbed. He believed Sekhmet was stirring. The gods had sealed her fury once, but man, foolish as ever, had begun to dig too deep, to question too much, to forget that some flames once lit can never be smothered. Sekhmet was watching, and this time she would not be tricked by beer. The desert wind howled like a beast in mourning, flinging sharp grains of sand against the cracked skin of Neferhotep's face. Days had passed since he fled Heliopolis, cast out as a madman by the very priests who once respected his wisdom. But madness had not driven him to the wilderness. Revelation had. Beneath the stars, he walked the trail of an ancient prophecy, one buried beneath the sands of time, and protected by a silence so heavy it could crush bones. With only a tattered cloak and a water skin, Neferhotep wandered toward the forgotten edges of Egypt, where the gods' voices still echoed through rock and ruin. Each night, he was visited by her, Sekhmet. In dreams soaked with sweat and dread, she appeared, her eyes twin suns, her breath fire, her presence unbearable. She did not speak, but he understood. She was awake now, not fully formed, but stirring, rousing like a storm just beyond the horizon. Her wrath leaked into the world in signs both small and terrifying. Lions prowled once lifeless dunes. Children cried blood. And in the sky, the sun turned red again, a hue not seen since the time of slaughter. At a crumbling oasis temple lost to time, Neferhotep found the prophetess Tanis, a blind woman said to speak with the tongues of the gods. Her skin was etched with old ink, and her eyes, though clouded, seemed to pierce into the soul. When he uttered Sekhmet's name, she flinched. Then, without hesitation, she spoke. She rises, the eye opens, and all the Nile will run crimson if the seal is not restored. Neferhotep fell to his knees, desperate. "Where is the seal?" he asked. But Tanis only wept and handed him a shard of obsidian shaped like a fang. "Follow the path of the lion. Where her paw last struck the earth, the relic sleeps." Meanwhile, back in Thebes, the girl born with the lion's mark, called Menwi, had grown into a curious child of 8. Despite her tender age, her presence was unnatural. She spoke little, but observed much. Animals obeyed her. Fires danced at her fingertips when she was angry, though no one taught her how. Her mother, a widow who once served in the temple of Hathor, watched with awe and growing fear. The priests, however, were less subtle. They came cloaked in incense and dread, whispering about oracles and rebirth. When Menwi touched the sacred idol of Bastet and it cracked in half, the elders gasped. Bastet was the gentle cat, protector of hearth and home. Sekhmet, her twin, was not so forgiving. The lioness had returned. the high priest of Thebes, Amun-Mose, convened a secret council beneath the temple of Amun. "This child must be taken," he declared, "for she is no longer only mortal. She may be the bridge between the waking and the divine, or the spark that lights the second slaughter." But the temple's oldest member, a stooped woman named Pahura, warned against haste. Sekhmet cannot be bound by shackles or chance. Only Ra's seal holds her at bay, and that seal is lost. Back in the desert, Neferhotep followed the vision etched into his mind by Tanis's cryptic words. He journeyed south into the region once called Nubia, to a place where old kings were buried beneath hills shaped like sleeping lions. There, he stumbled upon a broken temple, half swallowed by sand. Its columns were covered in carvings of war, famine, and fire, scenes not of worship, but of terror. At the heart of the ruins stood a statue of Sekhmet, taller than a man, with ruby eyes that glowed faintly beneath the moonlight. Her stone claws reached toward the sky, as if demanding justice. Digging at the statue's base, Neferhotep found what he had long feared, a hollow crypt lined in obsidian, and within it, wrapped in decaying linen and stained gold, lay the amulet, a lion's head carved from black stone, ringed with glyphs of sealing and warding. The moment his fingers brushed it, pain seared his chest. Blood leaked from his nose. He collapsed, and the desert around him shimmered as though burning in invisible flame. Above, the stars pulsed red. When Neferhotep regained consciousness, the amulet had fused to his hand, a jagged brand etched into his palm. He heard her voice for the first time then, low and cold, like wind through a battlefield. "You wear the mark of the betrayer. Are you Ra? Are you worthy?" He screamed, not in pain, but in fear. She was awake, not fully, but enough to speak, enough to reach. The seal was weakening. In Thebes, Menwi began to sleepwalk. Her mother found her one dawn standing barefoot atop the roof, face lifted to the rising sun. Her golden eyes were glowing. She spoke only one phrase before collapsing: "The fire is returning." Priests from across Egypt began reporting omens, statues weeping blood, water turning to ash in sacred basins, voices whispering through walls. Crops died where no disease touched them. Fires sparked without cause. The gods were silent. And yet one name returned in every divination: Sekhmet. Neferhotep knew now what he had to do. The seal was not enough. The goddess could not be hidden. She had to be understood, confronted, and, somehow, balanced. But how does one reason with divine rage? He looked at the amulet fused to his palm and realized it was not a weapon. It was a tether, a leash, or a key. And perhaps, just perhaps, Sekhmet was not the monster they had made her out to be. Perhaps her rage was not chaos, but justice forgotten. But the world would burn just the same, unless someone stopped what had begun. The fever spread quickly. Menwi's body burned with unnatural heat, her skin searing to the touch as if fire pulsed beneath her veins. Priests surrounded her with bowls of sacred water, chanting incantations from the Book of Light, hoping to cool what no human fire should stoke. But their rituals failed. The water boiled. Incense turned to ash. One priest collapsed screaming as visions overwhelmed him, of war, lions, and a river that flowed not with water but with molten gold. Menwi lay silent, her eyes glowing faintly even as her small chest heaved under the weight of whatever raged inside. Her mother, Sekhmet, never left her side. She had stopped pleading with the priests and turned instead to the gods in her own quiet way. Lighting a candle for Bastet, the gentler sister of Sekhmet, she whispered prayers not for healing, but for mercy. "She is a child," Sekhmet whispered. Spare her. Spare the world, if not for me, then for her. But the flicker of flame danced violently, as if in warning. Bastet, too, was silent. There was only the roar of Sekhmet rising. Far to the south, Neferhotep stood once more before the statue of Sekhmet at the ruined Nubian temple. His hand throbbed where the amulet had branded him. Each pulse of pain came with visions, battles from long ago, fires consuming cities, people screaming as the lioness goddess swept through them with divine judgment. But buried within those visions was something else, a memory not of rage, but of grief. One vision showed Sekhmet alone in a field of scorched earth, kneeling before the bodies of the dead. Her lioness head tilted skyward, her roar echoed not with triumph but despair. I was born to burn the wicked, she said to the sky, but who decides who is wicked? Neferhotep collapsed in the sand, tears carving muddy trails down his face. He began to understand. Sekhmet's fury had not been random. It had been ordered. Ra had sent her. And when she obeyed, when she did as commanded, they tricked her, silenced her, locked her away. Her rage was not chaos. It was purpose, betrayed purpose, divinity shackled. The seal was never about justice. It was about fear. Back in Thebes, the council of priests argued behind heavy doors. Amenmose, the high priest, demanded immediate action. The girl is not a child. She is a vessel, and the fire within her grows stronger each day. Another priestess, Merira, disagreed. We cannot destroy her. The scrolls are clear. If Sekhmet rises through vengeance, she cannot be killed. But if she is understood, she may choose her own path. But who among us can reason with a god of wrath? Amenmose spat. Merira hesitated, then said, Perhaps not a priest. Perhaps the one who carries her mark. The scrolls Neferhotep once guarded had whispered of such an individual, the bearer of the flame, chosen not to destroy Sekhmet, but to confront her with truth. It was not a role of power, but of sacrifice. To wear the seal was to carry her pain, to feel her memories, and ultimately to offer one's soul as judgment. Neferhotep did not need to be told. He felt it in every step now. The amulet had sunk deeper into his hand, the glyphs crawling up his arm like black vines. His dreams were no longer only hers. They were theirs, shared. He heard her voice more clearly. She no longer growled. She whispered. Why did they fear me? She asked in the wind. Why does justice terrify the unjust? He followed the path shown in the dreams, dunes, rivers, old temples, always south, always deeper into the forgotten places. He walked without food for 2 days, guided only by the pull of the seal and the strange sense that someone, awaited him. He arrived at the temple of Djeser, once the jewel of the Valley of the Kings. Time and war had shattered its once proud columns. Statues lay broken, but something sacred still hummed beneath the stone. There, in a chamber lined with forgotten hymns to Hathor and Mut, he found a mural untouched by time. It depicted Sekhmet, her mane radiant, seated upon a throne of fire. Mortals knelt before her, not in fear, but reverence. Above her, Ra wept. It was not a scene of destruction. It was peace, a future perhaps, or a possibility long denied. Neferhotep pressed his burning hand against the mural, and the glyphs on the wall shimmered to life. A doorway, once invisible, cracked open. The air that flowed from within was ancient, thick with the scent of myrrh and ash. Inside, at the center of a small chamber, stood a brazier that never went cold. a fire that had burned since the time of Sekhmet's wrath. Surrounding it were 12 stones, each marked with the names of gods who had tried to contain her. Only one was missing, his. He knelt before the flame and whispered, "I do not come to bind you. I come to bear you." And in that moment, he was no longer alone. A great warmth surged into his chest, not painful, but full, immense. Her essence, her memory, her burden. He saw her again, Sekhmet, not as a destroyer, but as a goddess made weapon by others. Her fury had been real, but so had her sorrow. She had burned the world because the gods had asked it. Then they sealed her, condemned her, forgot her, until now. In Thebes, Menwi awoke. Her eyes no longer glowed, they blazed. She sat upright and said clearly, "The bearer has come. The lioness remembers." And the earth trembled. The desert night broke apart like shattered obsidian. Beneath the waxing moon, sandstorms gathered not from natural winds, but from something older, something awakened. From Thebes to Heliopolis, people whispered of a strange pressure in the air, as though the land itself were holding its breath. Dogs refused to bark, birds fell silent. Even the Nile's gentle current slowed as if listening. In temples, priests trembled before altars. Something ancient was rising, not in a rush, but with slow, deliberate power. Neferhotep emerged from the sacred chamber within the ruins of Djeser, his body trembling with a newfound weight. He no longer moved like a man burdened by curiosity. He moved like one tethered to a star. The flame from the eternal brazier now burned behind his eyes. The seal on his arm had grown into an ornate script that shimmered beneath his skin like molten gold. He could hear her voice clearly now, not in anger, but in deep reflection. Sekhmet was no longer distant. She was within him, watching, remembering, waiting. He walked east across the desert with no map and no stars to guide him. And yet, he did not falter. The power inside him pulled him forward like the tide. He knew where he had to go. The forgotten valley of Ankh-Ma'at, a place once sacred to balance and judgment. According to legend, it was there the gods debated whether humanity was worth saving when Sekhmet first descended in wrath. It was the only place where divine law had once questioned divine wrath. And if he was to confront her fully, it would have to be there, upon the old stones that bore witness to her fury and her betrayal. But he would not walk alone. Back in Thebes, Menwi rose from her bed as if guided by an invisible force. Her mother cried out, but Menwi's golden eyes silenced the room. She was no longer entirely a child. Her voice rang like a temple bell, calm yet ageless. "He calls me," she said. "The fire knows its reflection." The priests, now divided between fear and awe, followed her as she walked barefoot through the city. Wherever her steps landed, flowers wilted, water turned warm, and oil lamps flared without flame. She moved not like a girl, but a priestess from an older age, one whose blood carried the echo of Sekhmet's roar. The path of the lioness and her bearer had begun to converge. Far away in Heliopolis, where the sun god Ra had once ruled in brilliance, a disturbance shattered the chamber of relics beneath the great temple. Guards ran, priests wept, and bells rang in the middle of the night. The Eye of Ra, a circular ruby amulet that had been encased in stone for generations, cracked down the center. Its red glow dimmed, a silent sign that the eye's fury no longer belonged to the sky. It had returned to the earth. The gods, it seemed, had made their decision. Neferhotep entered the valley of Ankh-Ma'at at dawn, where stone pillars shaped like open hands reached toward the sky. Each hand bore an inscription, prayers, confessions, regrets. The place had long been buried beneath sand, but now it stood exposed, as if called forth by the footsteps of destiny. The sun burned a deep orange, casting long shadows across the ruins. He approached the central altar, a disk of black granite carved with the glyphs of truth, judgment, and fire. He knelt, not to worship, but to speak. "Sekhmet," he called, "I have carried your pain. I have seen your memory. You were not madness. You were justice, forced into war. And when you obeyed, they feared what they had unleashed." The wind stilled, and then, from every direction, the heat rose. The sand ignited. A column of flame burst from the earth, and from within it stepped a form, tall, radiant, terrifying. Sekhmet appeared not as a beast, but as a goddess made from fire and memory. Her lioness face was carved from gold, her eyes burning coals, her mane a whirlwind of embers. She stood upon the altar, her feet not touching the stone, but suspended in the heat of her own fury. "Do you speak for them?" she asked, her voice echoing across time. "Do you come to kneel, or to judge me as they once did?" Neferhotep did not bow. He stood, heart racing, and said, "I do not come for judgment. I come to give you what they denied. Truth, balance. The gods feared your power because it mirrored their failure. You were their fury made flesh, and they betrayed you." A silence fell, heavy and suffocating. Sekhmet stared at him, her face unreadable, and then she spoke again. "And if I choose to finish what I began?" "Then let it be your choice," Neferhotep said. "Not Ra's, not the council's. Yours." She stepped forward. Her flame licked at his skin, but he did not flinch. She raised one clawed hand and pressed it to the seal on his arm. The glyphs glowed so brightly that the altar cracked beneath their feet. But then she laughed. It was not a cruel sound. It was weary, ancient, almost mournful. "You bear my weight well, mortal." In that moment, something shifted. Sekhmet's fire no longer sought to burn. It sought to cleanse. The glyphs lifted from Neferhotep's skin and floated into the air, forming a radiant symbol above them. A third path had opened, not destruction, not imprisonment, but integration. She would no longer be denied her truth, nor used as a weapon by gods. She would walk as herself, a force of balance, a protector, a reckoner. But balance has its cost. As Menwi entered the valley, the earth shook. Her eyes met Sekhmet's, and the flame passed between them, from goddess to vessel, from vessel to world. Sekhmet was reborn, and the world would never be the same. The sun had never blazed so fiercely over the valley of Ankh-Ma'at. Its rays struck the earth like judgment itself, casting long, trembling shadows across the stone palms that reached upward in eternal supplication. The wind had died, the birds had fled, and in the center of the sacred circle stood the new trinity: Neferhotep, weary but alive; Menwi, the child vessel ablaze with divine inheritance; and Sekhmet, the lioness now restored to her full power, yet standing not as a destroyer, but something more complex, more human. For a moment, nothing moved. The silence was so profound that even the gods might have paused to listen. Sekhmet turned to the child, her blazing eyes searching Menwi's with a kind of divine curiosity. She tilted her golden head. "You are young, yet carry centuries," she said. "You are flame not yet kindled, but your heat is ancient." Menwi met her gaze without flinching. "I am not afraid of you," she said. "I see your pain." The goddess smiled, not in joy, but in recognition. "Then you will understand what must come next." Neferhotep stirred. "What do you mean? Haven't we restored balance? You've returned, but you're no longer bound. Isn't that enough?" But Sekhmet's expression darkened. The air thickened around them, and her voice dropped into a low growl. "Balance is not peace," she said. "Balance is truth, justice, consequence." She gestured to the world beyond the valley, to Egypt, burning slowly with its forgotten sins. "While I slept, the world grew fat with lies. Those who walk in power walk unpunished. Those who cry out in pain are silenced. The gods have withdrawn, and the people suffer in their absence. And now I remember everything." A vision struck Neferhotep like a blow. Cities choking on smoke, temples gilded in the blood of laborers, rulers who paraded as divine while they ground the poor into dust. He saw priests hoarding offerings meant for the sick. He saw children tossed aside in the name of conquest. All the while, the gods watched and did nothing. It was no longer about humanity mocking the divine. It was about humanity betraying itself. Sekhmet's form shimmered. The flames around her surged, no longer an aura, but a weapon. "I will not be Ra's tool again," she said. "But neither will I stand idle. The reckoning begins today, not as wrath without reason, but as fire that cleanses." Menwi stepped forward, still calm despite the heat curling the air around her. "Will you kill them all?" she asked, voice small but steady. "Everyone who sins?" Sekhmet's gaze softened, a lioness watching her cubs. "Not all, but those who rot the roots of the tree must fall, or the forest dies." In the cities, strange things began to happen. In Memphis, a priest was caught stealing grain from famine stores. As he fled into the temple of Ptah, a lion appeared, not seen, but felt. The man burst into flame before witnesses, no torch or spark in sight. In Karnak, a corrupt governor woke to find every mirror in his estate shattered. In their place was a single message carved into stone: "The flame sees." Fear spread faster than fire. The high priests who had cast Neferhotep out now scrambled to restore ancient protections, chanting old hymns, pouring sacred oils over forgotten relics. But their magic was hollow, their voices weak. Sekhmet's fire was not one of destruction alone. It was discernment. It passed over the innocent, touching only those who cloaked themselves in deception. In the valley, Neferhotep stood before her once more. "If you become their judge," he said, "how will they learn? If you burn every hand that has stolen, every voice that has lied, there will be no one left to rebuild." Sekhmet nodded slowly. "Then let the innocent rebuild. But I will not be still while the innocent are broken." Menwi approached him, her hand now warm with steady heat. Not wildfire, but a guiding flame. "There's another way," she said. "You taught me that the seal isn't only a prison. It can also be a beacon, a mirror. Let them see themselves through your eyes, through hers." And then Neferhotep understood. The seal was never meant to cage Sekhmet. It was meant to connect her. Together they returned to the altar, where the symbol of balance still shimmered in the air. Menwi placed her small hand upon the glyph. Let her flame enter the hearts of men, not to destroy, but to reveal. Let the fire burn the lie, but spare the soul that turns toward truth. Sekhmet stepped beside her, resting her clawed hand atop Menwi's. "So it shall be." A wave of golden fire erupted from the altar, not outward, but upward, rising into the sky, forming a circle in the heavens that shone like a second sun. Across Egypt, people looked up and felt heat not on their skin, but in their spirits. Secrets they had hidden bubbled up, guilt returned, remorse followed. And slowly, quietly, change began. The reckoning was not a slaughter, it was an awakening. Yet not all would be redeemed. In the shadows of power, where old evil festered, plans stirred. Those who feared the light began to plot in darkness. For if Sekhmet had returned to cleanse the world, there would always be those who sought to snuff out the fire. As night fell, Sekhmet stood at the edge of the valley, her form glowing faintly in the moonlight. "This is only the beginning," she said. And from behind her, Menwe whispered, "Then let the world burn bright, not in ruin, but in truth." In the days following the fire in the sky, Egypt became a land divided, one half bathed in reflection, shaken into repentance, the other half bristled in silence, bitter beneath the weight of exposed secrets. The cities closest to the valley of Ankh-Ma'at experienced it first, the reckoning, not with sword or storm, but with a strange inner heat. Crooked scribes confessed in tears, thieves returned what they had stolen and knelt before beggars. False prophets tore down their own temples, weeping as they burned their scrolls. Something divine had pierced the veil of ordinary life. A presence, a pressure, a truth they could no longer ignore. Yet not all welcomed the light. In the city of Abydos, deep in its underground catacombs, a gathering of silent priests known as the Circle of the Withered Palm met beneath torchlight. These were men and women of old magic, ones who had worshipped neither Ra nor Ma'at, but older, darker gods, forgotten beings buried before the Nile found its voice. They spoke of Sekhmet's return, not with reverence, but fury. "She brings judgment without trial," one hissed. "She burns without consent." "Then we shall burn her back," said another. At the center of their circle lay a single item, a jar of blackened clay, sealed with blood. Inside it pulsed a living darkness, Isfet, the unformed chaos that predated even the gods. They would unseal it, let chaos rise again, let it devour fire with shadow. Better a world in ruin than one ruled by a lioness with conscience. Back in the valley, Sekhmet sat beside the sacred altar at dusk, her golden mane dimmed by thought. Since her awakening, she had not rested, not blinked, not exhaled fully. Even gods could tire, but this new form of justice, this path of awakening rather than annihilation, demanded something foreign to her nature: patience. Menwe approached, carrying a bowl of water and a sprig of lotus. Her movements were quiet, ceremonial. Sekhmet tilted her head. "You honor me as one honors the gods of healing." "You are one," Menwe said plainly. The goddess let out a low rumble of thought. "Once I was only fire, now I am asked to temper flame. That is no easy thing." She looked at the child. "Do you still see visions?" Menwe nodded. "I saw a shadow uncoiling, a clay jar, a temple with no gods. I heard your name spoken by mouths that hate the sun." Neferhotep arrived just in time to hear the last part. His robes were torn, and his skin burned in places where the divine mark on his arm had glowed too fiercely. "I've seen the signs too," he said. "They're moving in the dark, those who worship Isfet. They call chaos not because they believe in it, but because it is the only thing that terrifies the fire." Sekhmet stood. Her form rose like a desert storm, calm and immense. "Then we must remind them. Fire does not fear darkness. Fire consumes it." That night, the goddess walked among the people for the first time, not in rage, not in mystery, but in radiant truth. Her form shimmered through Thebes, Memphis, even remote villages where people had only ever heard of her through stories. Children followed in wonder. Elders wept. She did not speak. She simply looked. And in that gaze, each person saw their soul. For some, it brought peace. For others, it sparked unbearable fear. A merchant who had sold water at cruel prices during droughts threw his riches into the Nile and begged forgiveness. A midwife who had turned away sick mothers stood silently in a garden, allowing bees to sting her until dawn. A prince fell to his knees and kissed the feet of a servant he once whipped. The fire was not in the streets, it was in their chests. The ash of the old world had begun to speak. But in Abydos, something else awakened. The clay jar shattered under the chanting of the circle, and from within spilled not liquid, but absence. A black fog rose, hissing with language no human throat could shape. The walls trembled, stone cracked. The torches died instantly. The leader of the circle, a pale-robed priest named Sekhmet, stepped into the fog with a wicked grin. "She rises with judgment," he whispered, "but we rise with silence." The fog slithered up his arms, entered his eyes, and fused to his voice. "We are not the sinners," he declared. "We are the erasers. Let her fire burn. We will wipe away the world she leaves behind." That night, the stars over Abydos disappeared. Sekhmet felt it instantly. A tremor ran through the ground. Her eyes narrowed. "They've loosed it. The ancient chaos. Isfet walks again." Her hands clenched, flames licking up her arms. "I was reborn to cleanse corruption. But chaos cannot be cleansed. It must be destroyed." Neferhotep placed a hand on her shoulder, unburned. "Then let's go together." Menwi joined them. The fire and the bearer, the flame and the mirror. "You're not alone." Sekhmet looked at the child, then at the man, and a quiet pride sparked in her gaze. She had returned, expecting only battle, but found allies instead. They turned south, toward the growing shadow. The final war had not yet begun, but the fire was ready. Abydos was no longer a city. It had become a hollow wound on the land, pulsing with shadow and silence. Where once stood temples and gardens, there now lay blackened earth and twisted ruins. The sky above had vanished, no stars, no moon, not even clouds, just a dense canopy of void, a night that did not end. The people who remained in the city no longer remembered their names. Their voices were stolen, their memories gnawed away by something older than death. Isfet, the primordial chaos, had not taken form in the way gods or demons did. It had seeped into thought, into time itself. It was not simply destruction. It was unmaking, a reversal of order, a tearing of identity. It did not kill. It erased. And standing in the heart of that growing abyss was Sekhmet, the high voice of the withered palm, now something more, something less. His robes had turned to strands of smoke. His eyes were bottomless pits. From his mouth came no speech, but the unsettling rustle of pages torn from books. Isfet had entered him, and through him sought to undo Sekhmet, not by war, but by obliterating the very idea of her. But fire, though it can be extinguished, cannot be erased. From the edge of the city's collapsed gates came light, not blinding, not wild, but deliberate, purposeful. Sekhmet entered the void, not in fury, but in command. Her mane shimmered like gold, beaten thin and laced with flame. Her breath ignited the dust. She walked with Menwi at her side, the girl now glowing faintly with the borrowed embers of the goddess's spirit. Behind them strode Neferhotep, his branded arm illuminating the path with steady radiance. The three of them, flame, vessel, bearer, stepped into the final darkness. Sekhmet's voice rang out through the airless void. "Chaos, I see you. I know your name. You were old when the gods were born. But you are not purpose. You are hunger without shape. I am not afraid." A reply came not in words, but in sensation. The memories of millions being unremembered, names slipping from tongues, prayers vanishing before they reached the sky. The city beneath their feet groaned as if the stones themselves were forgetting they had ever been stone. Menwi gripped Sekhmet's hand. "They're trying to erase even you," she said. "The fire is slipping." Sekhmet's mane flared. "Then we burn louder." Sekhmet stepped forward, his body trailing ink-black mist. Where his feet landed, cracks spread through reality itself. "Lioness of wrath," he rasped, though his mouth did not move. "You are memory. I am forgetting. You are flame. I am silence. You are judgment. I am freedom." "You are cowardice masquerading as freedom," Neferhotep shouted. "You are the lie that pretends nothing matters." Sekhmet raised her hand, and the fire roared in response. "Let me remind you, Isfet, I was born in blood, but I carry truth, and truth burns deeper than chaos." Sekhmet hissed, and tendrils of shadow lashed forward, seeking to wrap around Menwi, but the girl's eyes ignited like twin suns. She spoke, not in her own voice, but in Sekhmet's. "I am not yours to unmake." A wall of fire erupted, forming a ring around the trio. The battle began. Isfet surged like a tsunami of ink, seeking cracks in their defenses, memories they feared, doubts they carried, wounds they never healed. Neferhotep faltered as he saw flashes of his failures, the brother he couldn't save, the scrolls he burned, the silence he once chose. But then he saw Sekhmet standing tall, eyes never leaving the shadow, and he remembered. He had chosen truth. He thrust his seal-bearing arm into the air, and from it burst a beacon, gold light piercing the black. Sekhmet advanced. Her body radiated heat so intense it turned void into form. Around her feet, the stones remembered their names, columns reassembled, statues stood again. Where she walked, memory returned, identity fought back. The shadow screamed. Sekhmet hurled darkness at her, but she answered with fire. Every forgotten name reappeared in flame across the walls. She summoned the names of mothers, of lost cities, of vanished rivers, of those Isfet had tried to erase. "You do not own what has lived," she roared. "You cannot silence what has burned." But it wasn't enough. Isfet struck again, this time reaching deep into Menwi's chest. The girl gasped. Her light flickered. The shadows poured into her eyes. Sekhmet turned, too late. Menwi fell to her knees, trembling, the fire inside her dimming. "It's cold," she whispered, "so cold." Neferhotep dropped beside her, holding her face in his hands. "Stay with me. You are flame. You are Sekhmet's echo. Do not let it take you." Sekhmet reached down, pulling the girl close. "Then take me instead," she said to the shadow. "I was your enemy long before she was born. Leave the child. Take the wrath." The void hesitated, and then Isfet accepted. The shadows surged into Sekhmet, engulfing her body like black water. She screamed, not in pain, but in rage, as the chaos tried to unwind her, to erase her flame. Her form flickered, her lioness face melting into ash. Neferhotep cried out, holding Menwi tightly, "Sekhmet!" But then, a spark. Within the shadowed core of the goddess, a single ember remained. And from it came a whisper, not to the world, but to Menwi. "I am not just fire. I am the memory of fire. I am the will to rise again." And Menwi stood. Her body became the conduit. She raised her hand, and the flame returned, not from above, but from within. It shot skyward, a column of pure, golden truth. The light consumed Isfet from the inside out, unraveling the shadow with the very thing it hated most: memory, order, identity, flame. Sekhmet let out a final shriek as his body was reduced to cinders. And when the void finally fell away, Abydos breathed. The stars returned, the sky wept rain, and in the center of it all, Sekhmet rose again, reborn not as destroyer, but as keeper. Dawn broke over Abydos for the first time in what felt like eternity. The stars faded gently, not in fear, but in reverence, as golden light swept over a land reborn. Where shadows had once ruled, warmth now took root. Statues of forgotten gods stood whole again, carved glyphs no longer blank. The Nile, distant yet eternal, carried whispers of the night's reckoning down its winding path, and the people who had been touched by chaos blinked their eyes wide, memories returning in waves, names, dreams, songs they thought lost forever. They wept, not from fear, but relief. They remembered. At the center of the city stood Sekhmet. She was different now. Her golden mane had softened into glowing threads of light. The fire that once curled violently around her form now hovered like a gentle halo. Her lioness eyes still burned, but not to judge, to witness, to understand. She was no longer a weapon. She was a memory that refused to die, a protector shaped by pain, and now, by choice. Menwi stood beside her, the child no longer trembling but strong, the flame within her calm and radiant. She bore no scars, though she had carried fire through chaos. Her gaze was steady, her voice unshaken. She had become more than a vessel. She was now Sekhmet's mirror, not a reflection of wrath, but of renewal. Neferhotep, though weary, knelt before them with reverence. He had no godhood, no divine spark, but he had given himself fully to the path. The glyph on his arm had faded, but a faint shimmer remained, a scar of honor. He had stood between goddess and chaos. He had borne her truth when the world would not. Sekhmet turned to him. You walked through the fire, knowing it could burn away everything you were. And found I was more than I feared, he replied. She nodded. You are no priest. You are no servant. You are what the gods rarely have, a witness who does not flinch. Together, the three of them ascended the steps of the restored temple of truth. The wind carried petals from desert blossoms, blooming again after the purge of Isfet. People gathered below, uncertain whether to worship or simply watch. Sekhmet raised her voice, not to command, but to speak. You feared me, she began, because I was the fire sent to end your cruelty, and I was cruel, because cruelty had been demanded of me. I burned not to punish, but because I was told it was the only way to bring balance. She paused, looking out at the faces, farmers, scribes, mothers, soldiers. But balance is not silence. Balance is not obedience. Balance is truth. Chaos tried to erase you, tried to make you forget who you were, what mattered, what had been lost, but you remembered. She placed a hand on Menwi's shoulder. This child remembered me not as fury, but as pain. She saw beyond the roar and found the sorrow. And because of her, I chose to be more. The people were silent, but not out of fear. They listened with a depth that stretched into their souls. Worship is not what I ask of you, Sekhmet said. What I ask is that you remember. Remember the times you stood silent in the face of wrong. Remember the names you buried, the truths you ignored, the mercy you withheld. Let memory guide your justice. Let fire light the way, not to destroy, but to reveal. And with that, she descended the steps. The people parted without command. They bowed not to a goddess demanding devotion, but to one who had walked through rage, sorrow, and shadow. and come back choosing stillness over slaughter. Sekhmet did not stay in the cities. She walked the borders of the land, alone at times, sometimes with Menwi and Neferhotep at her side. Villages were rebuilt, temples rededicated not with gold, but with stories. Shrines to Sekhmet were painted not in blood, but in ochre and sun-dyed linen, bearing images of her not in war, but in watchfulness. In time, children learned her name with a new meaning, not destroyer, not even savior, but the lioness who chose to remember. And in that memory, the world found fire not to fear, but to follow.